Hey people, it's nice talking. Now we'll continue on our previous video of political authority, political theory. So this is Thomas Hobbes. Now we're doing establishing sovereign authority, where people mutually covenant each to the others to obey a common authority. They have established what Hobbes calls sovereignty by institution. When threatened by a conqueror, they covenant for protection by promising obedience. They have established sovereignty by acquisition. These are equally legitimate ways of establishing sovereignty according to Hobbes, and their underlying motivation is the same, namely fear, whether of one's fellows or of a conqueror. The social covenant involves both the renunciation or transfer of right and the authorization of sovereign power. Political legitimacy depends on how a government comes to power, but only on whether it can be effectively protect those who have consented to obey. Political obligation ends when protection ceases. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this because it's very relevant, because we have governments doing all these different things to protect from this disease, and a lot of these freedoms are being taken away in the name of protecting people from a disease. So it all relates to this, and according to Hobbes, he would justify it. And especially, one of the things I would say is, my main audience and followers are all black Americans, mostly anyway. So this is another question. So he says political obligation ends where protection ceases. So it brings a question to black Americans, Tijuanians I call them, which is the American nation does not and will not protect black Americans, so why are they so obligated to be loyal to it? I mean, we've seen plenty of videos of cops willfully shooting people, and the state will not prosecute or even remove them from their jobs. So it brings the question, why are people loyal to a nation that does not protect them and does not seek interest in doing so? Anyway, let's keep moving forward. Absolutism. Although Hobbes offered some mild pragmatic grounds for preferring monarchy to other forms of government, his main concern was to argue that effective government, whether it's formed, must have absolute authority. Its powers must be neither divided nor limited. The powers of legislation, adjudication, enforcement, taxation, war-making, and the less familiar right of control of normative doctrine are connected in such a way that the loss of one may forward effective exercise of the rest. For example, legislation without interpretation and enforcement will not serve to regulate conduct. Only a government that possesses all of what Hobbes terms the essential rights of sovereignty can be reliably effective, since where partial sets of rights of these rights are held by different bodies that disagree in their judgments as to what is to be done, paralysis of effective government or degeneration into a civil war to settle that dispute may occur. I mean, this is something to be said for America, like if you remember the shutdown, the arguments between Congress and the president, where he's trying to get a budget done and they won't agree. And this is, if that had gone on, would there have been civil strife? Similarly, to impose limitations on the authority of the government is to invite irresolvable disputes over whether it has overstepped those limits. If each person decides for herself or whether the government should be obeyed, fractional disagreement and war to settle the issue, or at least paralysis of effective government, are quite possible. To defer resolution of the question to some further authority, itself also limited and so open to challenge for overstepping its bounds, would be to initiate an infinite regress of non-authoritative authorities, where the buck never stops. To refer it to a further authority, itself unlimited, would be just relocate the seat of absolute sovereignty, a position entirely consistent with Hobbes' insistence on absolutism. To avoid the horrible prospect of government collapse and return to the state of nature, people should treat their sovereign as having absolute authority. When subjects institute a sovereign by authorizing, they agree in conformity with the principle, no wrong is done to a consenting party, not to hold it liable for any errors in judgment it may make, and not to treat any harms it does to them as actionable injustices. Although many interpreters have assumed that by authorizing a sovereign, subjects become morally responsible for the actions it commands, Hobbes instead insists that the external actions done in obedience to laws without the inward problem are the actions of the sovereign, and not of the subject, which is, in that case, but an instrument without any notion of its own at all. It may be important to Hobbes' projection of persuading his Christian readers to obey their sovereign that he can reassure them that God will not hold them responsible for wrongful actions that done at the sovereign's command, because they cannot reasonably be expected to obey if doing so would jeopardize their eternal prospects. Hence, Hobbes explains that whatsoever a subject is compelled to do in obedience to his sovereign, and doth it not in order to his own mind, but in order to the laws of his country, the action is not his, but his sovereign's. This position reinforces absolutism by permitting Hobbes to maintain that subjects can obey even commands to perform actions that they believe to be sinful while fear of divine punishment. And this becomes a very good moral quandary. Like if you talk about Nazi Germany, if the state tells people to do something like to kill innocent civilians, is the person carrying out the command responsible, the person who gave the command, or both? While Hobbes insists that we should regard our governments as having absolute authority, he reserves to subjects the liberty of disobeying some of their government's commands. He argues that subjects retain a right of self-defense against the sovereign power, giving them the right to disobey or resist when their lives are in danger. He also gives them seemingly broad resistance rights in cases in which their families or even their honor are at stake. These exceptions have understandably intrigued those who study Hobbes. His ascription of apparently inalienable rights, what he calls the true liberties of subject, seem incompatible with his defense of absolute sovereignty. Moreover, if the sovereign's failure to provide adequate protection to subjects extinguishes their obligation to obey, and if it is left to each subject to judge for herself the adequacy of that protection, it seems that people have never really exited the fearsome state of nature. The aspect of Hobbes' political philosophy has been hotly debated ever since Hobbes' time. Bishop Bramhall, one of Hobbes' contemporaries, famously accused Leviathan of being a rebel's catechism. More recently, some commentators have argued that Hobbes' discussion of the limits of political obligation is the Achilles heel of his theory. It is not clear whether or not this charge can stand up to scrutiny, but surely it will be the subject of much continued discussion. Well, basically, I don't personally think it's a contradiction. The sovereign is given absolute power in order to protect the subject's life. If the subject's life is put in danger or is threatened by the sovereign, he's no longer obliged to obey because he has broken his contract with his citizen. Religion and social instability. The last crucial aspect of Hobbes' political philosophy is his treatment of religion. Hobbes progressively expands his discussion of Christian religion in each revision of his political philosophy until it comes in Leviathan to comprise roughly half the book. There is no settled consensus on how Hobbes understands the significance of religion within his political theory. Some commentators have argued that Hobbes is trying to demonstrate to his readers the compatibility of his political theory with core Christian commitments, and it may seem that Christians' religious duties forbid their affording the sort of absolute obedience to their governors which Hobbes' theory requires of them. Others have doubted the sincerity of his professed Christianity, arguing that by the use of irony or other subtle rhetorical devices, Hobbes sought to undermine his readers' religious beliefs. However, his intentions are properly understood. Hobbes' obvious concern with the power of religious belief is a fact that interpreters of his political philosophy must seek to explain. Hobbes on women and the family. Scholars are increasingly interested in how Hobbes thought of the status of women and of the family. Hobbes was one of the earliest Western philosophers to count women as persons when devising a social contract among persons. He insisted the equality of all people very explicitly, including women. People are equal because they are all subject to domination and are all potentially capable of dominating others. No person is so strong as to be invulnerable to attack while sleeping by the concerted efforts of others, nor is any so strong as to be assured of dominating all others. In this relevant sense, women are naturally equal to men. They are equally naturally free, meaning that their consent is required before they will be under the authority of anyone else. In this, Hobbes' claims stand in stark contrast to many prevailing views of the time, according to which women were born inferior and subordinate to men. Sir Robert Filmer, who later served as target of John Locke's first treatise of government, is a well-known proponent of this view, which he calls patriarchalism. Explicitly rejecting the patriarchalist view as well as the Salic law, Hobbes maintains that women can be sovereigns. Authority for him is neither male nor female. He also argues for natural maternal right. In the state of nature, dominion over children is naturally the mother's. He witnesses the Amazons. In seemingly contrast to this egalitarian foundation, Hobbes spoke of the commonwealth in patriarchal language. In the move from the state of nature to civil society, families are described as fathers, servants, and children, seemingly obliterating mothers on the picture entirely. Hobbes justified this way of talking by saying that it is fathers, not mothers, who have founded societies. As true as that is, it is easy to say how there is a lively debate between those who emphasize the potentially feminist or egalitarian aspects of Hobbes' thought and those who emphasize his ultimate exclusion of women. Such debates raise the question, to what extent are the patriarchal claims Hobbes makes integral to his overall theory, if indeed they are integral at all? Okay, so I've finished that. I hope you've enjoyed this and I've learned something about political theory, and it leads you on to further thought. I'm going to leave this in the description. Please comment, rate, share, and subscribe if you'd like to support this channel. I'll leave the GoFundMe in the description. And if you'd like to follow me on Instagram, I'll leave it there as well. Peace.